Welcome, George Peterson, to the Rising Phoenix Wellness Podcast. We are basically a podcast that's designed around having conversations that matter or facilitating conversations that matter in, holistic approaches to wellness with an emphasis on recovery. So we're excited to have George with us today. So he is a certified Vedic educator, which I'm excited to hear more about, and also the founder of the Global Shift podcast and co-founder of Nourish Mindful Events, and also recently launched a charity called the Jordan Hanna Fund, if I'm not wrong.
Jordan Hanna Recovery Group. Yep.
Okay. And so we'll be talking a little bit about that today because George is also going to be speaking at our Recovering Me online recovery summit on December 6th. And all of the proceeds from our virtual event are going to be going to that charity. So we're excited to have George on to support that cause and to learn from you and figure out more about what you do. So welcome.
Yeah, Nathan, thank you so much for having me. Really grateful to be on the podcast and grateful to also be speaking at the summit and being able to share our nonprofit with everybody who attends.
Yeah, awesome, man. Okay, so at the summit, obviously our focus is on recovery and sort of a holistic approach. So there's so many different approaches to recovery. One of the things that got in the way, if I can put it that way, when I first started in my recovery mission or my recovery journey it was kind of like either go to a treatment center or go into AA, like traditional sort of 12-step
Mm,
programs. And at that time, I really struggled with the concept of God. And because I felt like there was really only two paths, I kind of was in and out of recovery for a while. And so the intention of that event is really to show everybody that there are so many different ways to recover. And one of the exciting things that that I want to learn more about today is obviously meditation is a huge part of the recovery process to me. I think it's probably the number one thing that somebody can do
mm.
to heal and to be on the path of recovery. And I would love to hear more about what a certified Vedic educator is.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm with you. I love that you've said that to me before, that meditation's like, I think you said you called it your superpower for your sobriety.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's my experience as well. One of my previous guests and one of my teachers, the founder of Ziva Meditation, her name's Emily Fletcher, talks about how if you offered her a check for $100 million to give up meditating, that she'd give you back your check. And so that's my experience too. You could write me a check for $100 million right now, and I wouldn't take it to stop meditating.
Mhm.
Um, as far as certified Vedic educator goes, what that means is that I've been certified to teach the ancient Vedic meditation technique that I teach today, which is known as PSM. And so, what it also means is that I've studied the Vedic traditions of India, and I've spent thousands of hours now studying this tradition and now learning to teach. And now, being a certified Vedic educator, I've been certified to go out and share all that stuff that I've been studying now all these years.
Mm. So does that um, in terms of the Vedic tradition, is that like the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita and like that?
Yeah. Yeah. So the Vedas, the simplest way to explain the Vedas would be um, to describe them as the body of knowledge that gives us the arts and sciences of ancient India. And so that's where we get things like Ayurveda from. That's where we get things like Vedic meditation from. And so that's probably the easiest way for somebody who doesn't know, um, learn a little bit more about what the Vedas are. Yes, that's where the Upanishads come out of, the Bhagavad Gita, um, and some other classical Indian text.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like I could talk about that with you forever because my wife is actually from the northern part of India. So
Oh, awesome.
they're part of the Sikh tradition. So it's a little bit different than the Hindu tradition. But I recently read the book called Think Like a Monk by Jay Shetty,
Yeah.
and he talks a lot about the Vedic tradition. Yeah, and you learned in Deepak Chopra's tradition or from him, or what was the relationship to you? What you've learned?
Yeah. So, um, I first, when I learned this technique, that's taught over the course of 4 days, it's taught in a comprehensive step-by-step 4-day meditation training. I went actually on a week-long meditation yoga retreat out at Deepak Chopra Center for Wellbeing, which at the time was located in San Diego. I went out there, and I was actually, you talked a little bit about sobriety. I got sober August 7th of 2011, and I went out on a week-long meditation yoga retreat they were hosting out there called Seduction of Spirit in March of 2012. And, up until that point, I'd tried some guided meditations, but by the end of this week-long meditation yoga retreat, and part of it was that you learn this technique that they teach over the course of 4 days while you're on the retreat. I walked away feeling like I knew more than like 90% of people that I knew out there meditating. And so I was able to walk away feeling like, wow, like meditation is something that's actually easy and enjoyable. And, for me, I always say that my problem was never getting sober, it was staying sober. And I couldn't stay sober because after, 30, 60, or 90 days without drugs or alcohol, I'd feel restless, irritable, and discontent.
Mhm.
And what I tell people today is that that freedom from being discontent that I sought through drugs and alcohol, I found through my meditation practice. And it was on that retreat out at Deepak Chopra Center that I learned this practice that gave me access to, as I like to say, my own inner reservoir of bliss chemicals. And
Oh,
that enabled me to redirect my search for peace from the outside in.
yeah.
When people seek a change in their emotional state and they don't know how to produce it from within, they reach for something outside of themselves. And so I remember at that retreat, they said, write down one intention you have for when you leave here. My intention was to come back again and do another retreat. And so, uh, there's a long story about how I even ended up there, but I ended up connecting again with my program consultant, which was the woman who helped me get there in the first place. And they were really inspired by my story. As I said, I got sober August 7th of 2011. I ended up there on March 12th. I mean, in March of 2012. And so I was newly sober, but um, I knew that this, ability to access that inner contentment underneath my discontentment that meditation had given me access to, I needed to share it. And so my intention was really to go back there to continue to learn and expand my knowledge base. And then I could go out there and help heal and serve others. There's actually a saying at the Chopra Center where I think it's actually maybe even a quote by Yogi Bhajan. I'm not quite sure, where it says, learn, share, teach, master. And it's really through teaching that we master.
Mm.
And so, I ended up back there on a 4 or 5 day, I think, training on Ayurveda, which, if you're not familiar, is a holistic based system of healing from India. It's actually the oldest healthcare system. It's over 5,000 years old. And I went there, and again, it was magical. And I set the intention that I would come back. And eventually I went back to the Chopra Center again to study, to become a Vedic educator, which is the training that you do in order to teach um, the ancient Vedic meditation technique that I now teach today, as well as Ayurveda. And so I studied there, put in thousands of hours of study from at home to actually going to the Chopra Center and studying, and then received my certification from the Chopra Center. And now I'm a certified Vedic educator through them.
Yeah, that's epic, dude. I find it fascinating, and really so you got introduced to the meditation side of things really early in your sobriety process. That's such a blessing. I
Well,
think because I did Vipassana, was it last year or 2 years ago? And on there, I got a really profound relationship with just kind of being with what's happening in the moment, right? Whether it's a knee ache or a bodily ache or fear or anxiety or whatever. And that like strengthened my sobriety so much. That's why I say now it's my superpower, because it's what helps me get, really powerfully connected to, what's going on internally in my body. Whereas I had years of recovery where I was not drinking. And so I was technically, I guess you call it sober or whatever, but I wasn't aware of how disconnected I actually was from my own internal feelings and, my sense of well-being. So it's amazing that you got that so early on, and now you've been teaching it for so long.
yeah, I mean, you know, I've I read a book once, and I've talked about it. If you've listened to my podcast, Global Shift podcast, before, you've heard me talk about a book called Sacred Contracts. I actually confuse it and sometimes call it Soul Contracts by Carolyn Miss. And it's about contracts we make with other people at the level of the soul before we are born into this body. And for me, I feel like this was a soul contract, a sacred contract that I made before choosing to incarnate into this body and mind.
Mm.
For me, my journey with meditation began once during one of my many attempts at getting sober. I was attending a 12-step meeting, and I got invited by some of the people at that meeting to go on a cookout where it was like, actually, it was a camp out with a bunch of other people who were in that 12-step group. And no coincidence, first of all, while I was there, I felt an immense amount of social anxiety. And I just felt uneasy and easily annoyed in my own skin. And, I was feeling just out of place at the camp out. And I remembered I had some guided meditations that my mom had put on an MP3 player that I happened to have with me. And I listened to them, and looking back on it, I wasn't even really meditating. I was more lying there, breathing and saying affirmations. But for the first time, my body actually started vibrating, like almost, that feeling when like your foot falls asleep.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I started to like feel that feeling throughout my whole body, and it felt really good. It was the first time I ever felt good in my body, like, and felt at peace and felt bliss on the inside. And it wasn't being produced by something outside of myself.
Mm.
And that feeling stuck with me. So, when I eventually relapsed and, started using again. But when I would try to get sober after, going on a spree, I would remember that feeling periodically. And it caused me a couple times to do some more guided meditations. And I remember I did Deepak Chopra's actually 21-day guided meditation series, and it enabled me to tap into that feeling again. And so this time when I got sober, I remember that feeling again. And I actually started one of those 21-day meditation series again this time when I got sober. And again, it brought back that feeling of being at peace in my own skin. And I just remember like having this epiphany and being like, oh my God, like each time I'm meditating, like I'm able to access my own inner happiness.
Yeah.
And I couldn't believe it, because the only way I'd known, the only way I'd known inner happiness before that was through drugs and alcohol. And so I actually called the Chopra Center because I was like, whatever this is,
Wow.
like meditation's giving me access to my own inner happiness. Like I literally had no experience with inner happiness, other than the temporary relief I felt from heroin. And
Right.
so I called the Chopra Center and literally told them what I'm telling you now. Like I'm experiencing inner happiness without drugs and alcohol for the first time. And it's because of this meditation series.
Yeah.
And the woman who I got on the phone with, no coincidences, was literally like, wow, this is amazing. Like, how long have you been sober? Like, again, I was less than a year sober.
Yeah.
And so she's like, yeah, we got to get you out here. And I literally told her, because I'd also heard about things like the law of attraction and like the law of intention. And like you could set intentions, and, if you detach from the outcome, the universe would work out the details. And I was like, if this stuff's really true, then like, I don't have the money to go out there. Like that retreat that I went on to learn the technique that I now teach was $3,000.
Mm.
And I was newly sober. Like I had a job at a local organic grocery store. I was making $10 an hour. I was living in Boston. I didn't even have money to buy food or pay my rent.
Yeah.
And I was like, I got to go on this retreat, because I'd been looking for inner happiness my whole life in drugs and alcohol. And I was in a hopeless state of mind and body. And I knew that like I was either going to keep going on the way I was going and die, or I was going to get some help. And so I was like, this is the thing that has helped me more than anything else. Like, I need more of this.
Yeah.
And so they got me on a payment plan that I could afford. And I actually could barely even afford it. I actually cut back on eating in order to have extra money to pay for the retreat.
Yeah.
And I paid for the retreat. I got on this payment plan, and the lady made it work for me. And I ended up at that retreat, and then the rest is history.
Yeah. That's amazing. So you did the 21-day meditations. That was sort of your introduction to meditation, and also what put Deepak Chopra Center on the map for you. And then you just reached out and made that connection.
Yeah, because in the beginning of those 21-day meditation series too, he would talk about things like the law of intention and desire.
Totally.
And so it was like, I was like, if this stuff's true, even though I think at the level of the soul, I knew that it was, I'm like, then like, I'm just going to like take the leap
Yeah.
and trust that the net's going to appear.
Yeah.
And, here we are now, November 2020. I've been meditating now using that technique, which is practiced 20 to 30 minutes twice a day on a daily basis. I've been doing that now twice a day on a daily basis for over 8 years.
Yeah.
And now I've been traveling the world myself teaching this meditation technique. And so I can see that, there was a power greater than myself at work in, the life that I'm able to live today.
Yeah. That's amazing. I resonate with what you're saying, because I've done a bunch of those, the 21-day meditations as well. The getting unstuck and hoping on certain times, and a number of the different ones. And I will say that when when the desire to meditate wasn't there, I always wanted to hear like his philosophy on something. And so I would go to it for that, and then also get the meditation. And it was that interesting dynamic of like the desire to learn something new and grow, and then also the meditation side. And somehow those two components really worked for me, so I can see where that would be such a draw.
Yeah, for me, it was those two components as well. It was not only the experience I was having, but it was the knowledge that I was getting from listening to those 21-day series.
Yeah.
And for me, I'm a fan of anything that starts somebody on the meditation train.
Right.
But I do think now, like having a lot more knowledge and experience than I did then, that, there comes a point when you do meditate, uh, you know, through the avenue of guided meditations, or maybe you go to a yoga class and that's where you you know find your time to meditate. I
Yeah.
think there comes a point though when you know you maybe hit what sometimes is called a meditation plateau, where you're looking for something more.
Yeah.
And that's where it would be great to sign up for something like the training that I teach, or someone like Emily Fletcher, who I talked about, Ziva meditation, her comprehensive step-by-step meditation training, or somebody like another one of my teachers, Light Watkins, who's a Vedic meditation teacher. And because these practices really, in my experience, just enable you to learn meditation's correct mechanics, so you can really understand the ins and outs of the practice. So
Mhm.
meditation can become one of the most enjoyable things you do all day long, which is, I think, something that's even today rare. There's a lot of people out there who meditate, but they do it because they're disciplined, they know it's good for them.
Right.
I
Right.
don't
Yeah.
think there's as many people who think, that meditation is literally the most enjoyable thing they do all day long. And that's my experience. Like, I literally plan my whole day around my meditation practice in the morning, in the late afternoon, or early evening. And that's important because 50% of success in meditation is determined by consistency.
Right.
And if you enjoy something, you're going to make time for it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's like a universal law. So yeah, and I think the what you said as well about it's sort of the immersion whenever you're doing anything, the element of immersion where you go and you spend 3 days or 7 days or 10 days or whatever, and you're really fully in something where you can get that sort of depth that maybe isn't easily accessible if you're just doing it each day. There really is something that happens in the immersion events like the ones that you run.
Yeah, for sure. And there's just something too about having a teacher,
Yeah.
um, to be able to help you better understand the experience and learn the correct mechanics.
Yeah.
Something I love that Light Watkins, um, who I talked about, says is, you know, when we understand meditation's correct mechanics, we learn to make meditation work for us instead of feeling like we have to work hard to meditate.
Yeah. That's beautiful. Yeah, I think I told you that in one of the other conversations that we had, but I'll just share quickly
Yeah, please.
when I did the Vipassana meditation, and I didn't realize until about 3 or 4 days in, but I went there like seeking some sort of enlightenment. I'm like, okay, I was feeling some sort of irritable discontent, like you were saying, right? And I wanted to go because I wanted to like, it's so funny to even say this now, but I wanted to like level up my spiritual game. You know what I mean? And I really went there with the intention of becoming better at meditation, or really to become like the best, right? So I went there, and it was like the first day they're like, okay, you're going to be meditating for like 10 hours, you know. And I remember like the first day being in there, like, okay, that sounds horrible, but I'm going to sit down, and there's like women on one side, men on one side. And I just remember thinking to myself, like, my long distance runner thing kicked in, right? Where I'm just like, okay, I don't care how much pain I experience, I'm going to win. Like, I don't care what happens. I will be the last person to stop meditating today. And I just remember bringing that super competitive, like trying to win at meditation mindset into the weekend, which
Mm.
is, it's so crazy to think about, but that's where I was. And I remember on day 3, the first 3 days were like horrible. They weren't horrible, but they weren't easy, right? I'll put it that way.
Mm.
There's a lot of discomfort, there's a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety that came up, stuff that I hadn't obviously processed. And then day 4, I had like this breakthrough. It was like this euphoric experience. There was like white light, my like body disappeared, and I thought I had like achieved something, some level, And I went to the meditation teacher, telling him like I was a good boy. I had this amazing experience today, and I like broke through, and the other days were terrible, and today was amazing, and I had this experience. And he was and this speaks to the importance of a teacher. He was explaining to me that when you're relating to the meditation as pain and suffering and struggle, and you're avoiding that, that's the aversion. And in the Vipassana, the other side of that is craving, right? So if you're seeking in this good feeling and this like enlightenment, and you're trying to achieve that state, then that also pushes you away from like the present moment or whatever. And so here I thought I had achieved something amazing, and Had I not had a teacher, I would have sat down every day trying to attain that state again.
Mm,
And thank God he really helped me see to let both of those things go.
mhm,
There's craving and aversions are two sides of the same coin of suffering. And
mm.
I don't know, I may never have learned that lesson if I didn't have a teacher. So speaking to what you were saying, like it's so important that you have somebody that can guide you down that path, because you can save 10, 15 years of whatever, and like that. So I totally resonate with that.
Yeah, I mean, just to have a teacher be able to tell you, like, you know, we don't meditate to get good at meditation. We meditate to get good at life,
Hmm.
or Deepak Chopra used to say, the real benefits of meditation come the other 23 hours of the day.
Yeah.
Emily Fletcher expands on that concept of, we don't meditate to get good at meditation. We meditate to get good at life by saying nobody cares if you're good at meditation. Everybody cares that you're good at life,
Hmm.
and it's like, even if you just look at stress, when we're physically and mentally less stressed, we're going to be able to perform better at the top of our game in our lives.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, earlier you said something about the inner reservoir of bliss chemicals, right? If I got
Mm,
that right, I just, what a
yes.
beautiful, first of all, what a beautiful analogy. But so tell me a little bit about the particular kind of meditation that you do. You shared the analogy of the ocean at one time. That that reminds me, this idea of an inner reservoir is similar
Mm,
to that, right? So what
yeah.
is that?
Yeah, so the technique that I teach, one of the things that happens is you receive your own personal mantra. And if you're not familiar with the word mantra, it means an instrument or a vehicle of the mind. And
Okay.
so you receive your own personal mantra and the mechanics for using that properly. And so the mantra is sort of like the vehicle for transcending our thoughts. So when I talk about transcending our thoughts, a good way to describe what I mean is to use the analogy you just talked about of the ocean.
Hmm.
If you think about the ocean and you think about waves on the surface of the ocean, imagine those waves are like the 60 to 80,000 thoughts a day we have on average as a human being. UCLA's Laboratory of Mental Imaging did a study that said we have a thought on average every 1.2 seconds, which averages out to about 60 to 80,000 thoughts a day. And so if you imagine the thoughts are like the waves on the surface of the ocean, you'd see, if you did a cross section picture of the ocean, that even when there's waves on the surface, where it's 100 feet deep, let's say, at the bottom of the ocean, things are calm,
Yeah.
things are still, things are silent, even when there's waves on the surface. So same with our minds. Underneath those 60 to 80,000 thoughts a day, there's calm, there's stillness, there's silence. And in the training that I teach, when you receive your mantra and the mechanics for using it properly, you learn how to go from that busy surface focused thinking zone of your mind where the waves are, down to the bottom to the quiet zone where things are already calm.
Yeah. Yeah. So even if there's like a cyclone going on in your life, you can achieve that deeper state of peace, that it doesn't matter what's going on externally. You can tap into that internal reservoir of bliss.
Yeah, you can transcend beyond space, time, and causality.
Yeah. That's
And
amazing.
here's the thing, right? Most people, right, are struggling, right, when it comes to meditation because the difficult experiences are being seen as correct meditation.
Right.
But when you really understand meditation's correct mechanics, that experience of transcendence can literally become one of the easiest things you do all day long.
Mhm.
And, you know, again, that's where the value of having a teacher and having somebody who can explain to you how to have that experience comes into play. Because I still go to 12-step recovery group meetings, the biggest reason being because there's so many people there who I can help and
Yeah.
who I can share this kind of information with.
Yeah.
And I'll literally hear people at 12-step meetings go, I can't sit still for 5 minutes without wanting to blow my brains out, and they're dead serious,
Yeah.
right? And that experience of transcendence that we're describing is an experience that I've been able to teach people after the second day of my training to
Yeah.
start having. And so it's like these people are having this within a few days of learning to meditate. And so,
Wow.
I had somebody come over for the first of the 4 days of my training within the last year, and we went so deep in the meditation that we over meditated for an hour. And this was the first time they'd ever meditated.
Mm,
That they were so deep that they didn't even have enough awareness to know to come out.
wow. That's incredible, man. Yeah, I for sure. I mean, I can, I've never been as in the depths of the sort of despair and self-loathing and stuff that I've been through in terms of my own recovery process. Like I remember being, especially in social situations, like in malls and stuff, like having so much fear and anxiety. I just would, sometimes if I was walking, I would have to not get close to bear like the balconies or whatever, not because I wanted to die. I just had these weird like sensations of like just going
That's
over.
so crazy you just said that. Because I used to have that same experience as a kid, even before I got into drugs and alcohol. I remember I grew up skateboarding. Like for me, before I wanted to travel the world and teach meditation and get meditation into as many people's hands in recovery in the world as possible, right? Before I wanted to do that, I wanted to become a professional skateboarder. So I'd skateboard to the skate park like every single day. I'd spend the whole day there. And I'd go over this bridge in the town I grew up in, and I would just have this sensation arise in me to jump over the edge. And it wasn't that I actually wanted to or I actually wanted to die. It was like these thoughts, right, that would just float through the Akashic field of my mind.
Yeah, yeah, it's crazy. I wonder how many people. There's probably a lot of people that can resonate with that.
Yeah, it's amazing that you said that because I'm sure there is. It's like a lot of things, just a lot of people who aren't willing to talk about this stuff.
Yeah.
But I was like, yeah, that's exactly the feeling that I used to have anytime I'd be walking like next to a balcony or something. I'd have like this like thought to like leap or this like urge, like almost like physical feeling in my body to like leap over the edge.
Yeah, yeah. No kidding. So you mentioned when you were a kid, right? So one of the things that I do like to do whenever I meet somebody new or have these conversations is learn a little bit more about like what you were like as a kid and what your home life was like, what your parents were like when you were coming up through that time, what was the environment that you were coming up in?
Yeah. So yeah, I really appreciate you asking that. Um, yeah, I mean, I don't remember a lot of memories from early on in my childhood. I mean, I know, a few facts about my childhood because of, things I was told from my family. My dad was a really bad alcoholic. I actually was born out in California, and my father's drinking had got so bad that my parents got divorced, and my mom had to move us to the East Coast out to New Hampshire because that's where she had grown up, and she couldn't afford to live in California as on her own as a single parent. I know before that, my dad was in Vietnam and he had uh, gotten hooked on heroin over there. And as a result of his drinking and his heroin use from Vietnam, he actually ended up dying of complications of Hep C uh, and cirrhosis of the liver. And so my mom, raised us as a single mother, me and my sister, and she ended up getting a boyfriend who is still her boyfriend today. They've been together for like, I don't know, it has to be like 20 years now. Um, and he did a fair amount of drinking himself, and you know, I just they would. I remember. I don't have a lot of memories. That's why maybe what I'm saying right now might seem all over the place, but I do remember, to relate it back to my addiction. I do remember them asking me as a kid, and I mean, they weren't the only ones. So in no way am I, thinking my parents did anything wrong, but I do remember them um, saying like, "Oh, can you go get us a beer from the fridge?" And so I would open it on the way without them knowing and take a sip. They'd think I just opened it and gave it to them, but I took a little sip along the way. But I don't really remember how the alcohol at that time made me feel because I was so young.
Yeah.
But you know, I just always felt, uh, this feeling of anxiety and fear and this inability to be with myself by myself and be okay. Looking back on it now, hindsight's 2020, I can see that I was just always looking for an outside fix for an inside job. I think the easiest way to describe what was going on for me in my childhood without being too specific is to talk about a term Deepak Chopra, coined, object referral, which means when your happiness is dependent upon people, places, and circumstances. And looking back on my life, I can see that, you know, uh, my happiness was dependent on things outside of myself. And when I mean dependent, I mean like when those things weren't around, like I felt this deep void, like something was missing, inwardly. And so, you know, eventually when I picked up alcohol for the first time, I don't remember. I actually do remember like smoking weed, like really getting high for the first time. And we used to go up to like the local corner store and steal a bunch of alcohol and uh, put it in between our, like belt and our waistline at the corner store and bring it back to my best friend's parents' house and drink it in their basement. And then I remember actually like the first time we smoked weed at their parents' house, we went outside after their parents fell asleep. When we tried to come back inside, we tried to sneak back in, the house was locked. And they knew we had gone outside, and then they're like, why do you guys smell like smoke? And I remember telling them, I forget how I came up with this on the spot, but I ended up telling my buddy to tell his parents when they were questioning him that we were outside lighting fireworks and we're outside smoking weed. They weren't dumb. They knew what we were doing, but at least like in my mind, I thought like we had gotten away with it. But I remember the first time like I drank to get drunk, it was when my mom and her boyfriend who I talked about went away for the first time, and they left my mom's boyfriend's son and me the house for the first time. And he was a little older, so they trusted him. And I was a freshman in high school. And I remember being like, we should have a party. And he thought like, yeah, a few people should come over. And by the end of the day, on that Friday at high school, like the whole high school thought they were going to my house because I had told everybody. And I had this massive party. Um, and, I thought I was the man because like all the kids who I thought were the coolest kids in the high school had come. And I ended up like becoming the most drunk one there. And like right from the start, because I remember that was like the first time like I really, drank to get drunk. And I can see that I had like an allergy to alcohol. Like as soon as I took that first drink, my body craved more. I was the most drunk one there. I remember like they had these trash barrels that were filled with ice for beer, and they were grabbing me by my ankles and dunking me in the trash cans. And I just remember, you know, uh, you know, as awful as I felt because, of how much I drank, I still like for the first time felt like that fear and that anxiety and that social uh, anxiety that I had went away when I drank like that. I was always one of the things that uh, I felt so uncomfortable about was my ability to talk to women. And I remember at that party, I got so wasted, I wasn't afraid to say anything to anybody.
Yeah.
I remember I was just screaming. I actually fell and I smashed my head on the corner of the fridge. And I was lying on the ground screaming, I just want somebody to have sex with me because I just didn't care. And I was trying to drag girls upstairs to have sex with me. And it allowed me to be the person I thought you needed me to be okay.
Yeah.
And then fast forward a few years, I was again looking for an outside fix for an inside job. I was in a state of object referral. Happiness was dependent upon people in in this circumstance. And I told you this story before, but there was a girl. She was the prettiest girl in my high school, and I just wanted to do anything I could to get close to this girl, even though she had a boyfriend. And I ended up finding out she uh, wanted to go to a Britney Spears concert. I don't even know how I found that out because my memory of this time is so all over the place.
Yeah.
Because I'm only at 15 years old here, and somehow my sister had tickets, couldn't go. She got sick. I got the tickets. Give you the short version. I asked her if she wanted to go. She said yes. And a couple of days before that concert, I remember I was in the high school cafeteria and she asked me if I'd ever try heroin for the first time. And I was scared at first because I thought I had to use a needle, but then I found out that I could sniff it. And I was probably going to use it anyways, even if I had to use a needle, because I wanted to do anything that I thought this girl would want me to do,
Mhm.
And so I went to the Britney Spears concert afterwards. Her and her boyfriend's best friend picked me up, and they passed a CD case around with lines of heroin, and I sniffed my first line of heroin at 15. And by the time I was 18, I was a full-blown IV drug user in a hopeless state of mind and body. And I think that's why I don't have a lot of memories of my past, because I started using heroin pretty much every day at the age of 15.
Mhm.
And I didn't get sober till right before I was 23. So for 8 years, the majority of the time I used heroin almost every day.
Yeah.
And so then fast forward, I got sober right before my 23rd birthday, and less than a year after that, I learned how to meditate, and things have never been the same since.
Yeah. So I imagine you talk to a lot of people that are in recovery, right? So, because I also don't have a lot of memories from when I was younger, and I don't know why that is, because I actually grew up in it. Like, my father's a minister. My family was like literally like, if you think about like Leave It to Be, was it Leave It to Beaver or whatever? Like, I grew up in like a warm, fuzzy like bubble of love. And so there was no sort of traumatic anything that I can remember, but I don't have a lot of memories as well from my younger years. So it oftentimes I wonder, did something happen that like created this like scotoma that I can't remember these things, or I just wasn't present, or I just
Well,
wonder if that's a common thing from people
you
that.
make a good point though, because are you familiar with Gabrielle Bernstein?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so I love Gabby. Part of the reason I've been able to like now teach so many people in recovery how to meditate is because she helped me, really step into my power around, um, you know, sharing meditation with people in recovery and, helping and healing and serving the recovery community. I went to her Spirit Junkie Masterclass, um, right in the beginning of my journey as an entrepreneur in recovery. And, I just got infinite value from that program that really helped me eliminate a lot of the blocks that were keeping me from really stepping out on this journey that I'm now on. Getting sober, I had like this money block. Not to get off track, I'll get back to what you just talked about, but I had this money block because I was like, I got sober in a 12-step group, and it was like, we have to freely give what was so freely given to us. And so I was like, sponsoring people and taking them through the 12-step process that I had gone through. And I thought like, well, I can't charge now to teach meditation. And she helped me realize and gave me an affirmation to start saying that earning money for my great work was going to help me give more to the world. So it really helped me step into my power around that, because I realized that like I'm only so good in my, limited location where I was at, sharing the teachings that in the experience that I had. And so when I started to earn more money for my work, because I was able to worked through my money block. Now I've been able to travel the world and teach meditation because there were a bunch of other things in blocks she'd helped me work through, but because, she was able to help me, bust through these blocks that were keeping me limited to my small self. And um, now, because of the work that, she did, or that I did with her, I've been able to move from my most individual self to more of my most universal self, my soul or my spirit.
Yeah.
And so I say that because she talks about, realizing, I can't remember how many years sober, a memory that she had suppressed, childhood trauma. And, I wonder, based on, what you just shared, if maybe there are some things that, because she didn't even remember until one day, I believe, and I'm sorry if I'm getting the story wrong, but she was in an elevator and being trapped in the small space that she was in triggered that childhood trauma, uh, you know, triggered her to remember that childhood trauma. And,
Okay.
so maybe one of the reasons we can't remember some of this stuff is because of, you know, certain traumas that our body has kind of kept hidden in order to protect us.
Yeah. 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 I don't want to get off on too much on my story, but I know because Gabor Mate talks a lot about, addiction being rooted in trauma. And I've
Mm,
often tried to think about my own life in terms of, I can't recalling any, not only not trauma, but like, is like, I was the prom king. Like there was a lot of things that that were very easy for me, when I was young. And then recently I listened to Tim Ferriss's podcast where he went and I think he did Vipassana, or it was either ayahuasca or Vipassana. And when he was there, he remembered being sexually abused when he was like 2 or 3 years old. And he went until he was like 30 some odd in his life with no recollection of that happening. And then in a moment, he recalled all of that. And obviously that brought up a lot of stuff, which has then given him the opportunity to heal that.
exactly.
So, but man, I remember when I was listening to that podcast, I was riding my bike down to Cumberland, and I was on like a long bike ride and listening to that podcast. It made me wonder. I wonder if
Well,
it's something I haven't accessed.
and that's why, there's a great saying that says, I'm sure you've heard it probably, uh, what we don't reveal, we can't heal.
Mm,
And, another saying is better out than in.
mm-hmm,
And, that's why, the meditation, to bring it back to the meditation each time, is so powerful, because our body's a perfect accountant. And so stress stores itself in our cellular memory, right? We have stored in our cellular memory what is known as stress triggers, which is a trigger alert highlighting sensations related to past stress.
mm,
And so when we start to meditate, especially, uh, you know, using one of the Vedic techniques, you're you actually start to produce a higher quality rest chemical. And the higher quality rest chemical starts to go down into the cells and boot out some of those deep, deep stress triggers that are stored inside of us. And so it's a way to release some of those, traumas that are stored in our cellular memory,
mm-hmm,
that, may, up until this point, not even be known to us. And so that's another reason why in our training, we don't just give people their mantra and send them on their way. Because, just like knowledge without experience is just an intellectual exercise,
mm-hmm.
experience without knowledge can be scary and confusing. So if in the middle of meditation, you start releasing a childhood trauma that you didn't even remember happened to you, you start thinking about something that you hadn't thought about in a very long time, or you start thinking about something that you didn't even remember happened. If you don't understand what's happening, and you don't understand that that's your body, releasing the backlog of stress that we all have, then you're probably never going to want to meditate again.
Yeah.
And so it's just another reason why it's so important to have a teacher so they can help you better understand these experiences. So when they happen, they're not as confusing and scary. And so you can, again, be reminded better out than in,
Yeah.
right? The stress just can't magically disappear. So if it's going to leave our body, we're going to have to experience it to some degree again, whether that's in the form of meditation or, shadow work's another way that we can release some of these deeper trauma wounds that we all have.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember on the podcast, Tim Ferriss actually says that Jack Cornfield, who does, the love and kindness meditation.
Yeah.
He's, a lot of people know Jack. He was there on the Vipassana, and that's why Tim was saying if had Jack not been there, he might not have come back. It was a really traumatic experience. So
Totally.
yeah, he's really talking about that. So in terms of the meditation as well, like um, because I know, for maybe people are coming to this and maybe they're new in recovery, or, they obviously people will come here from different spaces. But I know for me, one of the hardest things about the recovery process was when I was early in my recovery, the, the drugs and the alcohol, which people that haven't dealt with, addiction think of as the problem. They don't understand a lot of times that these things that we use are oftentimes the solution to, the fear and anxiety and the disconnection,
100%.
like you were saying. And when you don't have that thing that you've been using to deal with that, you're in this raw state of emotion and confusion, and you have these things that are really difficult to deal with. And I think that's where at least in early sobriety, meditation has this incredible power to help people through that process, and tap into the, like you said, the reservoir of bliss chemicals. And that's, part of why I wanted you to come on the Recovering Me virtual summit as well, because that's why I think meditation is so critical in early sobriety to help deal with that.
Yeah. You just, I don't even need to say anything. You just said it. I mean, I say it all the time. Drugs and alcohol weren't my problem. They were the solution to my problem.
Yeah.
My problem was me. And, you know, there's the quote, I said it on the podcast I recorded earlier. All of man's problems stem from his inability to sit alone in a room quietly.
Mm.
And I don't remember who said the quote, but
Blaise Pascal.
yeah. How do you say his name?
Blaise Pascal.
Blaise Pascal.
That's how it's
Yes,
out of my mouth. That may not be. That may not.
totally.
Yeah.
So he has that quote, and that was my problem. I couldn't be with myself by myself and be okay.
Yeah.
And again, when I learned how to meditate, I was able to access my own inner happiness, my own inner reservoir of bliss chemicals.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it is so important because, it's cliche. And if you're in recovery, you may have heard this, but people say, like, hey, if you take away a bone from a dog, like, you got to replace it with something better.
Yeah.
And I could tell you this, and whoever's listening this, that, the things that have come to me ever since I committed to sobriety and started meditating twice a day on a daily basis are better than anything I could ever imagine.
Mm.
And so, as far as using goes, don't get me wrong. Like, I'm not going to sit here and say that I didn't have any fun using. Like, there was a ton of different times where I had a blast, but the bad times far outweighed the good.
Yeah.
But I can tell you today that even the bad, I would never, ever trade the bad times I have today for the good times I had while I was using.
Mm. Yeah. That's an important message for people to hear.
But I think my experience of that has come from having that spiritual toolkit laid at my feet. The most important tool in that toolkit being meditation.
Yeah.
And another thing, not to sidetrack, I just always like to mention it because I feel like one of the most overlooked aspects of sobriety. You talked about it. There's a difference between being sober and not drinking.
Right.
And I'm talking about, when I talk about sober, physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual well-being.
Right.
And so for me, the number one tool I have to cultivate that in my life on a daily basis is meditation.
Mm-hmm.
But a really important aspect, and it's actually something that I realized after starting to meditate, because as I was saying to you earlier, once I started meditating and staying sober, I started to become aware of all the other behaviors that were no longer serving me.
Yeah.
And one of the most important, and the first one I became aware of, was the way that I was eating. And, everything we take in through our five senses either has a negative or positive effect on our mind and body.
Yeah.
And one of those five senses is taste. And so, there's that quote: if you had a Ferrari, would you put 87 or would you put premium in it? This is the vehicle through which you move through life.
Mm-hmm.
We have to put premium in it. And, I go to sober houses and treatment centers to help people who are newly sober, and they're just filled with genetically modified food, sugar, candy, junk. And in recovery, we're trying to access higher states of consciousness and uplift our vibration. And the food that we eat lots of times lowers it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I remember, because I really got into my recovery path really coincided a lot with nutrition as well, right? I'm an integrative nutritionist, so that's sort of been one of the backbones of my recovery as well. But I remember when I first started, like I'd go to the AA meeting and it was like full of like really cheap black coffee and people smoking cigarettes. And
And like pounding cookies,
yeah,
like genetically modified Oreos.
tons of caffeine, tons of chemicals and cigarettes. And I remember thinking to myself, I know that, like you said, like you have to replace one thing with the other. And that's another place in which I think meditation is so important, because as when we're new in recovery, oftentimes, we can go from, drugs and alcohol to sex, or drugs and alcohol to caffeine, or drugs and
100%. We just replace one addiction for the other. And that's why the next behavior I realized that was no longer serving me after the food was pornography.
Mm,
And so I got sober from porn addiction, and now I help other people as well get sober from sex and porn addiction. Because
mm,
you're right. It's like you could just replace one addiction for the other and just look for that outside fix for the inside job, or we can seek happiness along the surface of our lives through other things, whether it's a relationship, whether it's sex, whether it's pornography, whether it's food.
yeah. Yeah, that's so interesting, because I think that sort of goes into the other aspect that I see as really important in terms of meditation. One is when you're early on, just dealing with those raw emotions and having something be able to help you get feeling okay in the moment, right? Allowing that the cravings and the fear and the anxiety to pass. And then the other element that I think is so important that you just touched on is when you're able to step outside of your own experience and observe yourself going through life, it allows then to come to surface all of these other things that aren't serving to you, right? So you become more aware of what you're actually doing in your life.
Mm.
It gives you more access to, recovering here. Like there's like layers of the recovery process that is super holistic.
100%. And, you talked about it, like having that tool to be able to deal with the raw emotions, going back to Gabby Bernstein. She has the quote: meditation recalibrates our energy back to the frequency of love.
Mm,
And then,
I love that.
When you talked about becoming a more conscious choice maker, if you want to understand why that is, if you want to understand the science behind it, because when we start to meditate, we start to cultivate a more tranquil, less reactive mind.
Right.
And so then our decisions start to come from that space of a more tranquil, less reactive mind. So then we're able to pause and respond as opposed to react.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah, I remember when I did the Vipassana, that was the thing that hit me harder than anything else, was just the realization that holy shit, I am in reaction every moment of my life. Even when I think I'm moving towards the things that I want, it's like I'm just constantly not at the cause of what's going on, but constantly at in reaction to what's going on in my life. Like you sometimes you see those little cells underneath the microphone and or the microscope, and there's like if you poke them, they just kind of like move around and they're constantly reacting and adapting to their environment or whatever. And I feel like as human beings, we become adapt so good at adapting that we become this total reaction to what's going on, and then we just never learned that that's actually what happened. In order for us to be able to deal with life, we developed all these mechanisms, but we never really learned that we did that, and so we just go along thinking that that's who we are, instead of realizing that actually that's just something that was made up for us to deal with life.
Yeah, and I wouldn't even call it personally adapting. I call it just reacting. Because like one of the things I talk about in the third day of my meditation training is we measure progress in meditation by our ability to adapt to change. Like I said, like we don't meditate to get good at meditation, we meditate to get good at life.
Yeah.
And so like there's a good line that says meditation won't stop your car from not starting, but it will change the way you respond to it. And so it's like I'm able to now respond to those situations where before I was just reacting. So that essentially makes me better at adapting.
Yeah. And I remember, just to go back, to touch on what you said earlier, or very, very early on, right? When you're 15, when you got locked outside, right? You learned how to lie very, very quickly, right? So that's like, for those of us.
Oh, like, that was even before 15.
Yeah. So I know that because, becoming part of an addict, when it becomes part of your lifestyle, I think if you look back in your childhood, you can find these situations where, you become so good at lying and denying and becoming, having that shape part of your identity.
Mm-hmm.
And then later on, you said that with the girl, right? So you would have done anything to get that approval, right? So I think these things that we learn at a very young age, right? The lying and manipulating, and then also the need for approval without us knowing it. A lot of times these are really the roots underneath of the addiction. So you can stop the substance, but until you really deal with a lot of these roots, you never actually heal.
And that's actually why most people go back to using again,
Exactly.
because they don't get down to the root cause.
Right.
And those root causes that you just talked about stem from object referral. And so what meditation does is it shifts us into a state of self-referral, which is where our happiness is an internal state of happiness that's independent of external circumstances.
Yeah.
And so, that's really, you're right, what it's all about. And the reason people don't get sober and the reason people use again is that they don't get down to causes and conditions. I was just having this conversation the other day about methadone clinics. And I don't know where you stand on those, but my whole thing is like, that's doctor prescribed heroin.
Yeah, for sure. There's no doubt.
And so, a lot of people are okay with it because like their son or their daughter is less likely to die on the street shooting up. But like for me, like I want, other people to experience this experience that I'm not having.
Yeah.
That this experience that I'm now having, which is that like if I had written down what I'd have now at 10 years sober when I got sober, like I couldn't have written this stuff down.
Yeah.
Like I eat plant-based. I didn't even know what plant-based eating was. Like I teach Ayurveda. Like I didn't even know what Ayurveda was.
Yeah.
And so I want other people to not have to settle for that experience of like, oh, at least my kid isn't going to die shooting up now.
Yeah.
Like, no, your kid can live a life better than they could ever imagine, no matter how hopeless of a heroin addict they've been up until that point. And I was having this conversation the other day with somebody saying that that's the thing about methadone. You might get somebody on methadone for a while, and the idea with the methadone, or what I, think is supposed to happen is, you use the methadone to get off the heroin, and then you're supposed to get weaned off of the methadone. The first problem is that kids aren't getting weaned off the methadone; they're on the methadone maintenance program.
Mhm.
And the second problem is that they're not doing any inner work. This is the biggest problem,
Yeah.
to get down to causes and conditions. So even if they do get weaned off, so now they're not dependent upon the government heroin, they're still screwed because they haven't done anything to fix the initial reason why they were getting high in the first place.
Exactly. Yeah, that's where the holistic and the integrative approach is so important. And that's why sometimes I think, sometimes I think we can go a little bit too far in kind of poo-pooing the medical industry and things like that, because that stuff I think is really important. Sometimes I see, the alternative or whatever holistic practitioners be a little bit hard on the medical industry or things like that. But because I do think there is a place for those things.
Totally. And I'm not trying to, say that, um, nothing in Western medicine can offer us value,
Yeah,
especially in relation to helping somebody get sober.
yeah,
I just think that, so often we're not getting down to causes and conditions. And a lot of times we're just replacing one substance for other pharmaceuticals, which I also don't think is the solution. But that's not to say that, nothing Western medicine's ever done has never offered value.
yeah. And I think in a lot of ways, a lot of that stuff is, there's a huge place for it, and it's helpful even with things like depression, anxiety. It's like if somebody has to be on medication for a little while in order to get you know to get them through what they're dealing with at the moment, then I'm all for that, as long as they're also talking to somebody doing this inner work, like doing these more holistic approaches.
Exactly.
Because yeah, that is really, in my opinion, the downfall of the sort of Western medical model, is they only focus on symptoms, because that's what the model is built on, but they don't actually go down to the root causes. So I think it's so important that these clinics and these different approaches incorporate exactly what you're talking about, so that we can actually help people heal and thrive, and not just survive and get past what they're dealing with.
Totally. And like you said, what's most important is, even if, maybe like you said, somebody has, let's say, bipolar disorder and they're on some medication,
Mm.
to also, be encouraged while they're taking the medication to be meditating,
Yeah.
to be exercising, to be changing their diet. It's like these things need to be offered in tandem with these pharmaceuticals. And also, it'd be nice if, too, more often, like, people were at least told about the possibility of one day maybe being, able to transcend certain medications. Doesn't mean all of them, but, not kind of just being placed in a position where it's like, here's this medication and this will make you okay. So just keep taking this for the rest of your life.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, I think that message is so important. And I think we can probably end on this, right? Because I think one of the messages that I always want people left with is that the process of recovery is not only that you can get better and you can make these sort of, negative experiences and loops go away, but you can also live a life that's completely extraordinary and transcend those experiences. And exactly what you said, 10 years ago, if you would have known that you were going to be teaching Ayurveda and eating plant-based and doing all these things, you probably, that wouldn't have made any sense, right? And so, the last question that I want to really ask you is, what do you feel like meditation and the whole process of recovery has given you that wouldn't have been possible had you not had to deal with the addiction in the first place?
Well, first of all, I love that question. We've talked about it before. And, the truth is like my entire life is a result of having gone through addiction.
Yeah.
And that's why I tell people when they're getting sober, and it might sound crazy when you're newly sober, but that becoming an addict was the greatest gift you've ever been given. Because the thing is when, you're a alcoholic, drug addict, you have an addiction and you're an addict of what I call like the hopeless variety, meaning like no matter how great the necessity or the wish, I can't stop acting out my addiction on my own power. The thing that's so great about that experience is that it places us in a position where we have to enlarge our spiritual life in order to stay sober.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing about enlarging your spiritual life is not only do you not, after, you start to pick up that spiritual toolkit, that you get shown on this journey, not only are you able to not pick up a drink or a drug or act out your addiction, whatever it is, one day at a time, but your life becomes better than anything you could ever imagine. And it doesn't mean that everything's always going to go your way.
For sure.
It just means that what happens actually is, this for me was largely brought about because of my daily meditation practices. You start to cultivate this inner knowing that even when things don't go your way, the universe, God, whatever you want to call it, has a grander design. And so it's like, even when you're struggling and, you're in the toughest moments life's going to present to you, and the fearful voice of the ego is there and it's reminding you how awful this is, and it's, making you feel like it's the end of the world, there's still this other aspect, this aspect of your higher self that knows life's happening for you, not to you. And so why is it the greatest gift you've ever been given? Because it enables you to contact that part of yourself that enables you to remain calm amongst the chaos happening around you, that enables you to maintain your center amongst everything else happening around you.
Yeah.
And so, for me, without going through addiction, I wouldn't have found meditation. And without having that experience of, you know, not being able to be with myself, by myself, and be okay, I probably wouldn't have known how great it is now to be able to every day have an opportunity to access twice a day my own inner reservoir of bliss. And it's like just the gifts that's given to me. The last thing, I'll say about that is, there's this analogy of the ones and the zeros, and all the gifts that sobriety gives you are the zeros. Today, if you heard some noise today in the background, um, I'm okay with that, because the noise that you're hearing is some of the gifts of my sobriety. My fiance is in the other room. This is our 2-family house that we own. I'm a landlord. Like, that doesn't make any sense. I used to share needles with people.
Yeah.
Like, people come to me to learn how to meditate and get advice on health and wellness. Like, I'm getting married in June. Like, these are all the gifts sobriety has given me. And my mentor, my spiritual mentor in recovery, told me that these are the zeros. He said, my number one, that's my sobriety. And he said, and for me, what's sobriety? It's meditating every day, twice a day. It's eating right. It's helping others. It's all the things we've talked about. It's shadow work. It's what I learned in the 12-step groups I've attended. But my number one is all that stuff. And if I put the number one in front of all those gifts, all the zeros, I got an infinite number of good things in my life. And that's why, without addiction, I wouldn't have this life I have today. I have this life where I have this infinite, literally infinite amount of good things in my life. And even when there's bad stuff, like I said, I know today I don't win some and learn. I don't win some and lose some. I win some and learn some, because even in the situations where things don't go my way, there's a lesson to be learned. And then there's a way to go take that situation to go out and help others. But the point of me telling you that is, I have this infinite number of good things in my life now. But if I take the number one away, my sobriety, I got zero left. And so without sobriety, I'd have nothing. And so sobriety is the greatest gift I believe that we've ever been given. And it's the reason I get to live my dream today, travel the world, teach meditation. And, it's the reason I've been given like the gift of, you talked about the nonprofit.
Mhm.
It's like the one of my dear, dear friends who teaches yoga on our retreats, Jillian Hanna. She joins me on our retreats with my fiance, who's a plant based chef, and her brother unfortunately had a period of time sober, and he relapsed on opiates down in Mexico, and he ended up getting some heroin that was cut with fentanyl, and he died on the spot. And in lieu of flowers, her family donated all the money to me. So I started a nonprofit called, as you talked about, the Jordan Hanna Recovery Group. We're now, um, you know, we are traveling around, sharing the knowledge and experience of the teachings of yoga and meditation and healthy living with people in the recovery community for free. And so all of this is possible because of recovery, to answer your question. So it's the greatest gift I believe anybody could ever be given.
Amen. Okay, great. So you touched on it a little bit there. So tell people where they can find you if they want to work with you, if they want to go to your retreats, if they want to donate to the Jordan Hanna Recovery Fund. Where can they find you?
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much again for having me. This has been an epic conversation. So, uh, as far as the Jordan Hanna Recovery Group goes and making a donation, um, you can go to the Jordan Hanna recoverygroup.org. Um, as far as my website goes, head over to nourishmindfulevents.com to learn about our retreats. We have a week long deep dive into meditation, learn to meditate retreat out in Breckenridge, Colorado, coming up in August 6th through the 13th. And we have one in Sedona too. We have two back-to-back week-long retreats in Sedona. Those are sold out, but you can learn about all of our retreats over at nourishmindfulevents.com. And then also, if you're just interested in learning about my meditation retreat, you could check out my website, which also links to nourishmindfulevents.com, which is George S, like the letter S, like S is in Spike, S Peterson, Peterson.com. And all of our information is on there.
Okay, awesome. And obviously we'll put all that information in the show notes if people are accessing this from YouTube as well. So yeah, so I guess we'll end on, December 9th, or sorry, December 6th. We're having the Recovery Me online virtual summit, and that is going to be a deep dive into a bunch of holistic, different approaches to recovery. Like you mentioned earlier, nutrition is a big part of that. There's biohacking, some meditation, some mindfulness. Some One of the guys is going to talk about smart recovery, and then also I'm going to have one person actually talk about the importance of relapse in terms of recovery. Excuse me.
Can I say one thing about that?
Sure.
Uh, Also, yeah, there's some really good speakers coming to your summit other than me. One of them is one of my best friends in recovery, Jesse Harless, who's an amazing speaker and presenter. So if you're listening, like, please make sure to go check out that summit and send people in recovery to go check it out because it's really, as Nathan's saying, going to offer people in recovery so many different resources, as Nathan so beautifully outlined on his site for the Recovering Me Summit. Overdose rates have gone up 30% since COVID in March. And so this is serious right now, guys. So go get this information.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that, and thank you for everything you're doing, brother. What you're doing in the world is amazing. The first time that we had our conversation, it was really impactful for me. I'm on this sort of the path of discovery in terms of what my calling is in terms of recovery, working with people in recovery. So I'm excited to have been put in touch with you by our mutual friend Julie Riesler, and just really excited about what you're doing. And I'm excited to learn more about your meditation technique, and just honored that you had to come on today. So Thank you so much for what you do, my friend.
Namaste, brother.
Okay.